When farmers grow barley, and especially from a U.S. perspective, how do they make that decision? What makes them consider the different risks, the different returns, the competing crops? What goes into the decision-making process? Is it simple? Is it complex? Is it a secret? Well, it's really not a secret, but there's a way that we can get there. First off, today I want to spend a little bit of time just looking at the U.S. barley situation. What's happened with the trends? We can look at some of the trends, how they've impacted U.S. barley, what's happened to acres. Then I want to get into a little bit on compensation to start that process and get that thought process rolling regarding how that decision process works. And when we look at that, we have to look at it not only from within a crop, but between crops. Because from there we'll move into risk. And then we can start to compare the relative risk. Each crop is risky to produce, but the risks across them can vary quite greatly. From that standpoint, how do we measure it? What are the odds that we're going to have a profitable crop? From there, I want to go into a little bit about how these things on risk assessment impact the procurement programs. All wheat, spring wheat, winter wheat, everything, we've watched it trend down. We look at corn, soybeans, keep trending up. Spring wheat, if we break that out for just a North Dakota look, trend has been generally downward. If I take that into a major barley producing state such as North Dakota, how has that change occurred? Well, if I go back into the early 1980s, again, U.S. farm program, but barley just kept a very steady downturn. If we look at soybeans over the past same time period, rapid growth. Corn has had some rapid growth. It's fallen off a little bit this past year, but we'll expect that to return. And then spring wheat. This is kind of an interesting one because when we went to freedom to farm in the mid-1990s, what happened? U.S. farm policy said, gee, it's a really good thing for spring wheat growers right now. And that went for a little while until it wasn't a good idea anymore and there wasn't any profit in it, and we watched that trend down as well. North Dakota itself is number one in about 15 or 16 different crops. The growers have a lot of choices. The allocation has changed quite a bit. 90% malting. That number is actually a little bit higher. This last year, the survey, or the back of the envelope calculation rather, is more than 92, 93%. We're just not seeing much for feed barley being planted. Those that do plant it, typically it's being used in the livestock industry in the western part of the state. With that in mind, growers target malting barley. That's what they want. Why? Contracting programs have been very beneficial the past few years. They've evolved very, very quickly, and they can be competitive. It started to make the crop competitive with corn, soybeans, and wheat. Why do we produce less? First off, we have a lot of crops that we can pick from. Export markets for feed barley, those have pretty much gone away. There's some, not a lot. Downside risk, something I do want to spend some time with, is what happens if I don't achieve malt quality and I lose my profitability? How does that impact me? And as a buyer, and I've been on the other side of it in the specialty crops business, I want to know how that impacts my procurement program. Cash flow. Malting barley sometimes has to be stored for a while. Corn, soybeans, well, I can deliver them and get a check. Very, very simple. Well, they look at a lot of factors in deciding what they're going to produce. That's what happens on the farm, and some are easier to produce. But it's like a business, and in any business, you've got two things: cash flow and turning inventory. A few years ago, we sat down with our county representatives of our organization and said, if you were to kind of build a little heat map as to barley production and what makes it different from producing other crops, what are the factors? What do you think is important? Well, it boiled down to two general categories: quality, and then of course the business management side, because you have to make money and be profitable. But then we said, well, let's score some of these. If it's something easy, we'll give it a 1. If it's something a little bit more difficult but doable, we'll give it a 2. If it's something that's still doable but takes a lot more management, well, we'll give it a 3. Well, what are the quality factors? Corn and soybeans, not really a lot there. Test weight, moisture content. Deliver, get paid, but they're going into the animal feed markets. Malting barley, bulk density, germination, mycotoxins or lack thereof, plump kernels, protein, heat damage, frost damage, sprout damage, moisture. Malting barley is the only crop that has to be delivered in a living state. Doesn't germinate, it's basically worthless. To sum it up, and we're not going to spend a great deal of time with this, but if we were just to look at spring wheat, malting barley, corn, and soybeans, and all the ones are easy factors, such as test weight and protein and the different issues that they have to deal with, whereas protein, moisture, germination, some of those issues in malting barley Take a little bit more management, a little bit more time. This is how the growers would rate it. Some of these crops are fairly easy, and malting barley even has a few easier things. And as the growers have gotten better at managing it, well, some of these factors have gotten a little bit easier too. It's been kind of an evolutionary type process. On the business management side, well, storage, because you don't just put it in the bin, and we're probably as lucky as any place in North Dakota. We live in the largest deep freeze in the world. It costs money to carry inventory. Price transparency, all the other crops have futures markets. Barley doesn't do that. Now, the industry's responded quite well in their contracting programs by trying to tie it to a futures market so that you have some type of a proxy. And that's been working well. Growers understand that. They like that. It gives some transparency to the pricing concept. Got to compliment the industry. That was a tough nut to crack, and they did a good job with it. So how do we compare the relative risks? There's a risk and reward trade-off. How do we measure that? What the growers call downside risk, but also to look at upside potential. How does that factor into the equation? What's my downside? What's my upside? North central North Dakota is up along the Canadian border. This is an area where we watch soybeans take over quite a bit. Corn to a lesser degree, but certainly enough. But the grower question, why should I grow malting barley? We wanted to try to determine how do we compare the crops. So let's just take wheat and barley. Just give them a very basic comparison. Well, the first thing that we always want to do as growers and buyers and anything is, well, what would the average return be? Well, the average return for barley in that particular region, about $87 an acre. Average return for wheat, about 82. Not a real big difference. Standard deviation among that, well, vary $64 either way for barley. Well, vary a little bit more than that for wheat. So most of the time with contracted barley in this particular corner of the world, 90% of the time I'm going to be somewhere between an $18 an acre loss and $183 an acre profit. Spring wheat, about 70% of the time I'm going to be somewhere in that same range. But I've got a little more than double the upside potential, and that's what this nice long blue tail represents. Because what the growers look at is this. They also look at that variability amongst that, but then they're looking at that maximum. Gee, if I look at this tail, there's a chance I could make over $700 an acre. What's the max on barley give me? 350. Is that a calculated risk? Yes. Is it something that every grower is going to go after? Probably not. Depends upon their risk aversion. But it gives us a mechanism for comparing. Barley contracting programs, we'd say to buyers and growers that they've provided quite a base of a bit of security to them, securing your production base. Take out that volatility. Long-term business relationships, that's worth something. People do business with people. Businesses don't do business with other businesses. I was in the industry for 14 years, and that was something my old mentors taught me very quickly. And being able to spread that risk. In order to spread it, it's got to be calculated, it's got to be mutually shared, and it has to be mutually beneficial. Crop insurance. For years in the U.S., malting barley was insured with feed barley as its base, and then they would try to do some various types of voodoo to make it into a product that kind of fit malt barley. It kind of worked and it really kind of didn't. 2016, and this is thanks to the growers and the malting industry in North America, a new product will be coming out that will insure malt barley in the U.S. as malting barley. Not as feed barley with a premium or discount or something else, but as malting barley. This has been a good cooperative effort. It's taken a lot of data, it's taken a heavy lift, and it's been great, and it's going to work well. We look at barley. It's publicly funded, publicly bred crop in the U.S. And it really does, but holds in there pretty well. We just hope we can even try to maintain it. So as far as a secret, what's a secret that makes growers do what they do? Well, there's really no secret to it. How they determine which crops that they're going to plant, not necessarily. But the process is methodical. They do have a decision process that they work through. It's very mathematical. Growers know a lot of the statistical side of this by instinct. It's something that you develop as a grower when you're working your own land and doing your own farming operation. It's very business-based. Depends upon what the banker says, depends upon what the prices are, it depends upon what generates profit for the farm business. And it's, as you've seen today, there's numerous components that go into this that go well beyond your average yield, your average price, and your average return.